There is a love that liberates and a love that diminishes. There is a love that sets fire to the soul, and there is a love that quietly corrodes it. The difference between the two often rests not in the other person, but within ourselves. For when you have not yet embraced your own wholeness, you will settle for fragments in others. But when you love yourself completely, you no longer accept the half light of mediocre loves. You demand the fullness of truth, of passion, of reciprocity. And in this demand you are not selfish, you are simply awake. Let me share with you 5 truths that unfold when self-love becomes the compass of your heart. There comes a moment in every human journey when the soul whispers a truth too deep to ignore. You were never meant to beg for love. Yet countless lives are spent in this quiet bargain, a transaction where dignity is traded for scraps of affection. It is the hidden contract many make with themselves. If I endure enough, perhaps I will be chosen. If I mold myself small enough, perhaps I will finally fit into the space someone else has reserved for me. This negotiation is not a conscious act, but a symptom of a deeper forgetting, the forgetting of one's own worth. When you love yourself fully, you cannot take part in this quiet bargaining anymore. The moment you recognize your own inherent value, the contract dissolves. You realize that love is not something you need to earn, nor can it be sustained by self-erasure. It is here in this recognition that the chains of mediocrity fall away. Think for a moment about the young professional who finds themselves in a relationship defined by disrespect. The partner dismisses their achievements, mocks their dreams, and diminishes their spirit in subtle ways. Day after day, this person tells themselves that perhaps with enough patience, enough understanding, enough giving, the partner will eventually recognize their worth. They stay because deep down they believe their value is conditional, that it will be acknowledged only when they have proven themselves worthy of love. And so the negotiation continues, silently draining their soul. Now contrast this with another person, one who has embraced their own self-worth. When faced with neglect or disrespect, they do not spiral into doubt or self-blame. They do not plead or shrink. Instead, they calmly walk away, not out of anger, but out of reverence for themselves. They know, with unshakable clarity, that love which costs them their dignity is not love at all. Their worth is not on the market. It does not depend on another's recognition. It simply is. To love yourself completely is to end the exhausting bargain. It is to look at yourself with such clarity that you can no longer tolerate being treated as less than sacred. It does not mean you demand perfection from others or close yourself off from the natural imperfections of human relationship. Rather, it means you no longer confuse sacrifice of your soul with love. You no longer allow neglect to disguise itself as patience, nor disrespect to masquerade as passion. So many people walk into relationships carrying the unhealed wounds of childhood. Perhaps they grew up with conditional love, the kind that only arrived when they performed, excelled, or suppressed parts of themselves to maintain harmony. In such an environment, love becomes intertwined with effort, with sacrifice, with self-betrayal. As adults, these individuals unconsciously recreate that dynamic, seeking partners who reflect their inner belief that love must be earned. They become negotiators of worth, forever seeking approval that never comes. But when one chooses to love oneself completely, this cycle ends. Imagine the shift in energy when someone finally says, "I will not diminish myself to be loved. I will not wait to be seen by someone who chooses blindness. I will not sell my soul for the illusion of companionship." Such a declaration is not born of bitterness, but of awakening. It is the soul's refusal to participate in its own diminishment. Loving yourself completely also transforms how you interpret others' behavior. A person who has not embraced self-love will see rejection as proof of their unworthiness. But a person rooted in self-love recognizes rejection for what it is, a mismatch, not a verdict. When someone withdraws, belittles, or fails to cherish them, they do not internalize it as failure. They understand it as information. They know that love which cannot meet them with respect is not love they need to carry. This is not merely theory. Research has shown that individuals with strong self-regard have healthier relationships and are more likely to leave situations where they are undervalued. The data affirms what the heart already knows. Those who anchor themselves in self-love will not tolerate environments that diminish them. They understand that to stay in such spaces is to abandon themselves, and self-abandonment is the deepest betrayal of all. Think again of that young professional. For years, they lived in the shadow of someone else's dismissiveness, clinging to the hope that change would come. One day, after yet another moment of disrespect, they looked at themselves in the mirror and saw the exhaustion etched into their face. It was then they realized the love they longed for could not be found in another's recognition, but only in their own. With that realization, they stepped out of the relationship, not in bitterness, but in quiet liberation. Later, when love found them again, it came not as a negotiation, but as an exchange between equals, because they had finally stopped negotiating with themselves. To love yourself completely is to establish boundaries that are not walls but expressions of truth. It is to know that kindness does not require self-erasure, that patience does not mean tolerating harm, and that devotion does not demand your diminishment. It is to hold the unwavering conviction that your dignity is not expendable, and so the call is simple yet profound. End the bargain. Do not trade pieces of your soul for a seat at someone else's table. Do not confuse love with endurance of neglect. Step into the fullness of yourself, and in doing so, you will repel the mediocrity that once clung to you. For when you love yourself completely, you are no longer available to cheap affection. You no longer negotiate your worth, because your worth was never negotiable to begin with. Infatuation is one of the most seductive illusions the human heart encounters. It bursts forth with the brilliance of a flame, dazzling in its light, intoxicating in its heat, and for a moment it feels as if we have stumbled upon something eternal. The pulse quickens, the world sharpens, and suddenly the other person seems to carry the promise of salvation. We mistake their presence for destiny, their words for prophecy, and their attention for love. But as quickly as it ignites, infatuation can consume itself, leaving behind nothing but ashes. And too often, those ashes are mistaken for failure, when in truth they are the remnants of illusion. When one has not yet cultivated love within, this illusion is almost irresistible. The unsteady heart, hungry for validation, clings desperately to the thrill of being desired. It feels like proof that one is worthy, proof that one is seen. And in that hunger, a person becomes blind to the truth of what stands before them. They confuse intensity for intimacy and the brightness of initial passion for the enduring glow of love. They project onto the other what they secretly long for in themselves, and so they fall, not in love, but into a mirage crafted by their own unmet needs. But when you love yourself completely, you carry within you a light that does not need to be kindled by another. You are no longer desperate for someone else's spark to ignite your sense of worth. This changes everything, because when you no longer need another to complete you, you can finally see them as they truly are. You can discern whether their presence brings depth, or whether it is only the surface shimmer of attraction. Self-love sharpens your vision. It removes the haze that blinds so many, and in doing so, it protects you from mistaking the fleeting for the eternal. Think of how many relationships have begun with fire and laughter, only to collapse under the weight of unmet needs. Two people, intoxicated by chemistry, believe they have discovered something profound. For a few months they orbit each other with feverish energy, mistaking intensity for closeness. But as time passes, the illusions crumble. They realize they do not share the same values, the same rhythms of life, or the same depth of commitment. What felt unshakable is suddenly fragile, and all too often hearts are left shattered, not because there was love, but because there was never anything beyond the illusion to sustain it. Self-love changes the story. Imagine a traveler in the desert who, thirsty and desperate, sees a shimmer on the horizon. To the unprepared traveler, it looks like water, like salvation. They run toward it, pouring their last strength into the chase, only to arrive at nothing but sand. But a traveler who has learned to carry their own water walks with clarity. They see the shimmer, but they do not rush toward it. They recognize it as a mirage, and they continue their journey with strength intact. Loving yourself is like carrying your own water. You no longer mistake the shimmer of infatuation for the substance of love. This is not to say that infatuation itself is wrong. It is part of the human experience, a spark of attraction that can bring joy and excitement. The danger lies not in the spark, but in mistaking it for the fire that warms a home. When you love yourself completely, you can enjoy the thrill of attraction without surrendering your discernment. You can allow the spark to unfold naturally, testing whether it is kindled into a steady flame of enduring love or whether it fades into smoke. Self-love keeps you anchored, so you are not swept away by the tide of illusion. Consider the story of a woman who once rushed headlong into every new romance, believing each time she had met her soulmate. The early days were always euphoric, long nights of conversation, promises whispered in the dark, visions of a shared future painted with bright colors. But inevitably the reality surfaced. The partner who seemed so attentive was emotionally unavailable, or the one who seemed so passionate was unwilling to grow. Each time she felt devastated, as if love had betrayed her. But in truth she had betrayed herself by mistaking the rush of infatuation for the substance of real connection. Only when she began to love herself, to honor her own needs, her own boundaries, her own depth, did the pattern break. She no longer rushed blindly into passion. She took her time, observing, discerning, and allowing the truth of the relationship to reveal itself. And in doing so, she discovered love that was not dazzling and fleeting, but steady and real. There is also the wisdom of modern research to affirm this truth. Studies in psychology show that infatuation activates the same neural pathways as addiction. It floods the brain with dopamine, creating euphoria and obsession, often blinding people to red flags and incompatibilities. But self-esteem and self-compassion act as a buffer, allowing individuals to maintain perspective even amidst the chemical storm. Those who love themselves are less likely to confuse the highs of attraction with the stability of love. They can step back, breathe, and ask, does this connection nurture me, or does it merely excite me? Does it endure beyond the sparkle, or will it crumble when reality appears? When you love yourself, you honor the difference between desire and devotion. You can enjoy desire without expecting it to bear the weight of permanence, and you can wait patiently for devotion, knowing it will come not as a rush, but as a steady unfolding. Enduring love is not a lightning strike. It is a sunrise, slow, steady, illuminating everything with clarity. And when you love yourself, you will not be fooled into chasing lightning when what you truly long for is the light of dawn. So many settle for mediocre loves because they are captivated by the shimmer, by the thrill of being chosen, even if only for a moment. But when you hold love for yourself, you no longer need to be chosen to feel valuable. You are already chosen, already seen, already whole. From that place you can wait for a love that is not a mirage, but an oasis. A love that nourishes rather than depletes, that endures rather than fades, that meets your soul rather than flatters your ego. And so, the great work is not to chase the shimmer, but to cultivate the well within. To carry your own water so faithfully that you cannot be deceived by illusions. Then, when true love comes, not as a blinding blaze, but as a steady, enduring flame, you will recognize it instantly. For the heart that has learned to love itself cannot be fooled by shadows. It knows the difference between a mirage and the living waters of love. There is a hidden rhythm that governs many of our relationships, a cycle that repeats itself so quietly and so persistently that we may not even recognize we are trapped within it. Those who have not yet embraced the fullness of self-love often find themselves caught in these patterns, drawn again and again to the same kind of partners, the same kind of pain, the same kind of disappointment. They chase after those who are emotionally unavailable, cling to those who manipulate, and mistake turbulence for passion. And though the faces change, the story remains the same. What feels like fate is often nothing more than repetition, a cycle born from wounds that have not been healed. When you do not yet love yourself, you seek in others what you have denied within. You tolerate behaviors that wound you because you fear that leaving will confirm your unworthiness. You endure manipulation because you have confused control with care. You pursue the unavailable because some hidden part of you has equated love with struggle. And so, time after time, you are consumed by toxic patterns that slowly erode your spirit. But the moment you choose to love yourself completely, these patterns begin to lose their power. The unconscious repetition that once governed your choices is illuminated by awareness. You begin to see clearly that the intensity you once mistook for love is in fact chaos. You recognize that the control you once accepted as a form of attention is in fact domination. And you realize that the partners who keep you at arm's length are not mysterious, but simply unwilling or unable to meet you where you stand. Self-love becomes the shield that guards you from falling into the old cycle again. Consider the person who finds themselves drawn, time and again, to relationships marked by turbulence. Every fight feels electric, every reconciliation passionate. They tell themselves that this is what love must be: fire, conflict, the constant push and pull. Yet beneath that drama lies a profound instability, a relationship unable to sustain true intimacy. Without self-love, this person confuses volatility for vitality, believing that chaos is proof of depth. But in reality, it is simply a storm that never clears. Now imagine that same person having turned inward, having done the work of cultivating love for themselves. When they encounter the same turbulence, they no longer mistake it for passion. They feel the drain, they see the cost, and they step away. The storm no longer holds them captive because they have found calm within themselves. They understand that love does not need to wound to feel real, that devotion does not require destruction. The power of self-love lies in its ability to anchor you. A study published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships revealed that those with higher self-esteem are far less likely to remain in destructive relationships. This is not because they avoid pain altogether, but because they possess an internal compass that keeps them from losing themselves in it. They can recognize when a dynamic is unhealthy because they know what it feels like to be whole. They refuse to confuse intensity with intimacy, chaos with passion, or control with care. Their love for themselves acts as a lighthouse, guiding them safely through the temptations and illusions that once consumed them. Think of the countless people who stay in relationships where manipulation is the norm. The partner isolates them, criticizes them, or controls their choices. Yet they remain, telling themselves that it is proof of love, that the jealousy or the possessiveness must mean they matter. But what they have mistaken for love is in fact fear dressed in the language of devotion. Without self-love, they accept the cage because they do not believe they are worthy of freedom. Yet when they learn to love themselves, they recognize the bars for what they are. They no longer interpret control as care. They understand it as a violation of their dignity, and with that understanding comes the strength to walk away. The tragedy of toxic patterns is that they often masquerade as destiny. We tell ourselves stories. This is just the kind of love I attract. This is just who I am drawn to. This must be fate. But the truth is far simpler, though harder to accept. These patterns are not destiny. They are reflections of the wounds we have not yet healed. They are the echoes of childhood dynamics, of conditional love, of unspoken pain. And until we choose to love ourselves, until we choose to heal, we remain caught in their grip. Loving yourself is not a guarantee that you will never encounter toxicity again. Life will always place before us people who test our boundaries, who stir old wounds, who invite us into familiar traps. But when you love yourself completely, you no longer step blindly into those traps. You see them for what they are, and you choose differently. You refuse to be consumed because you have learned that your wholeness is not negotiable. You carry within you the truth that love should expand you, not diminish you, nurture you, not drain you. One woman once shared how she spent years entangled in relationships with men who withheld affection, who kept her chasing after crumbs of attention. For so long she believed this was love, that longing and pursuit were simply part of the story. It was only when she began the work of self-love that she realized she had been addicted to the cycle itself. She was not in love with these men, she was in love with the chase, with the temporary relief she felt when they finally gave her what she craved. Once she learned to give that love to herself, the spell broke. The cycle lost its hold, and she was no longer captivated by those who could not meet her. Instead, she opened herself to relationships grounded in mutual respect and genuine care. To love yourself is to step out of the repetition that has bound you. It is to recognize the patterns not as destiny, but as invitations to grow. Each toxic relationship becomes a mirror, showing you where you have abandoned yourself. And each time you choose to honor your worth, you weaken the grip of the old cycle. Slowly, the partners who once held such power over you lose their appeal because you see them with new eyes. Their manipulation, their inconsistency, their chaos, none of it seduces you anymore. You have built a shield, and that shield is love. In the end, the refusal to be consumed by toxic patterns is not an act of rebellion against others. It is an act of devotion to yourself. It is the decision to no longer abandon your soul for the illusion of connection. It is the choice to remain whole, even if it means walking away from what once felt familiar. And in that choice lies true freedom. For when you love yourself completely, toxicity loses its seduction, and only love that honors your wholeness can remain. There is a vast difference between being noticed and being truly loved, yet many confuse the two. Attention is easy to give, it costs little, requires no depth, and often evaporates as quickly as it arrives. Love, however, demands presence, reciprocity, and commitment. The tragedy of mediocre relationships is that they often survive on crumbs, on fleeting gestures, empty promises, and the illusion of connection that keeps one half of the heart always waiting. When you have not yet rooted yourself in self-love, you may find yourself clinging to these crumbs as if they were bread, convincing yourself that small doses of attention are enough to sustain the hunger of your soul. But when you love yourself fully, the hunger changes. You no longer mistake gestures for nourishment. You demand reciprocity, not because you are demanding by nature, but because you have recognized your own worth. Think of how many relationships exist in this state of imbalance. One partner gives their all-time energy, vulnerability, while the other offers little more than fragments. Perhaps it is a late-night message after days of silence, or a hurried compliment that substitutes for true understanding. For the one starved of love, even these scraps feel meaningful because they momentarily soothe the ache of longing. But beneath the surface, something deeper is missing, the balance that allows love to flourish, the exchange that allows intimacy to breathe. When you love yourself, you begin to see these imbalances with clarity. You realize that a good morning text is not proof of devotion, that an occasional display of affection cannot substitute for consistent presence. The story of the woman who once celebrated those texts only to realize their emptiness is the story of many. At first, she clung to each message as a sign that she mattered, that she was remembered. But when difficulties came, when real life demanded depth and steadfastness, her partner was nowhere to be found. She understood then that attention was not love. Love is proven in the willingness to show up, again and again, not only when it is easy, but especially when it is difficult. Self-love teaches you not to settle for gestures. It teaches you to demand alignment between words and actions, between promises and follow-through. You no longer celebrate being noticed. You seek to be cherished. You no longer settle for the shallow ripples of occasional attention. You long for the steady current of reciprocity. And because you honor yourself, you are willing to walk away from relationships that cannot offer it. In many ways, this transformation mirrors the growth of a child into an adult. A child delights in attention because it is immediate and affirming, even if fleeting. But as the child matures, they come to understand that what truly matters is not the quick flash of being noticed, but the steady foundation of being cared for. In relationships, too, maturity requires us to outgrow the craving for attention and to seek instead the depth of reciprocity. And only those who love themselves enough to believe they deserve it are able to make this shift. Modern psychology confirms this truth. Research into attachment and relationship satisfaction has shown that consistent reciprocity, the balance of giving and receiving, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term relational health. Couples who experience mutual care, where each partner's needs are seen and honored, report higher levels of intimacy and fulfillment. By contrast, relationships that rely on gestures without substance often leave both partners dissatisfied and disconnected. This evidence echoes what the heart already knows, that love without reciprocity is unsustainable and attention without commitment is empty. I recall a man who once shared his story of awakening to this truth. For years he remained in a relationship where his partner offered him just enough to keep him invested, an affectionate message when he pulled away, a fleeting moment of passion when he questioned the bond. Yet outside of those moments he felt alone. He was present for her struggles, her triumphs, her daily life, but when he needed her presence, she vanished into excuses. For a long time he convinced himself that those brief sparks of attention were signs of love. But over time he realized he was exhausted, drained from pouring himself into a well that never overflowed in return. His turning point came when he began to ask himself what he truly deserved. In that questioning, he discovered a love for himself that had been dormant, and with it the courage to leave. He later described it not as the end of a relationship, but as the end of self-betrayal. When you love yourself completely, you refuse to celebrate crumbs as though they were a feast. You begin to hunger for something more substantial, and you trust that such nourishment exists. This trust is vital, because many remain in mediocre relationships out of fear that nothing greater will come. They convince themselves that the little they receive is better than nothing, that to demand more is to risk being alone. But self-love changes this calculus. It reminds you that being alone while honoring yourself is far richer than being accompanied while abandoned. It assures you that reciprocity is not too much to ask, but the minimum that true love requires. Attention is a spark. Reciprocity is the flame. Attention flatters the ego. Reciprocity nurtures the soul. Attention can be given without thought. Reciprocity requires presence, vulnerability, and the willingness to give as much as one receives. And so, when you love yourself, you no longer confuse the two. You stop mistaking a fleeting message for commitment, a hollow gesture for intimacy, a half-hearted promise for love. Instead, you seek the fullness of a bond where both partners carry the weight together, where both offer not just words but action, not just attention but presence. In the end, love is not about how often someone notices you, but about how deeply they know you. It is not about the gestures that are easy to give, but about the consistency of being seen and held through both light and shadow. To demand reciprocity is not to demand perfection, but to affirm that love must be mutual. And when you love yourself, you will never again settle for less, for the heart that has discovered its worth will no longer dance for crumbs. It will wait for the banquet of true reciprocity, and in that waiting it will not grow bitter or afraid, for it has already found nourishment within. It knows that attention is temporary, but love that mirrors the care you extend to yourself is eternal. There is a certain kind of presence that cannot be faked, an energy that speaks more loudly than words ever could. It is the presence of a soul that has made peace with itself, that has stopped searching for fragments outside and instead discovered the treasure within. When a person loves themselves completely, something subtle yet powerful begins to emanate from them. They do not plead for recognition, nor do they shrink to be accepted. They move through the world with a quiet steadiness, as though carrying an inner flame that cannot be extinguished, and those who encounter them feel it immediately, even if they cannot explain why. Such a presence draws not the shallow or the temporary, but those who themselves long for depth and authenticity. In this way, self-love becomes not only a shield but also a beacon, attracting relationships that mirror the wholeness already present within. So many people wander through life believing that love is a matter of chance, that to find someone of depth is a lucky accident. But it is no accident at all. It is a reflection of what we carry inside. A person who does not yet love themselves will often find their relationships echoing that lack. Partners who cannot commit, who mirror insecurity, who perpetuate cycles of pain. But the one who has rooted themselves in self-love radiates a different energy, and in doing so reshapes what is drawn toward them. Wholeness begets wholeness, just as brokenness attracts what is unfinished. I have often witnessed this transformation in people who once carried a long history of disappointment in love. One woman, for instance, had spent much of her early life entangled in relationships where she was undervalued. Again and again she chose partners who withheld affection, who kept her guessing, who gave just enough to keep her hoping. After years of heartbreak, she reached a breaking point. Instead of throwing herself into another search, she turned inward. She began to cultivate a life rooted in her own joy, her own passions, her own sense of worth. Slowly, she no longer ached for validation because she had learned to validate herself. What astonished her was what happened next. Without trying, she began to draw to herself people who treated her differently, friends who were supportive, partners who were present and kind. It was as though the universe itself had shifted in response to her inner change. In reality, it was her energy that had changed, and what could not survive in the atmosphere of her wholeness simply fell away. There is a magnetism to self, love that is undeniable. When you no longer need to be saved, you invite others to meet you as equals. You are not seeking someone to complete you, so you do not tolerate those who offer only fragments. You are not desperate for validation, so you do not settle for crumbs of attention. Instead, you stand firmly in your own light, and that light calls forth those who wish to stand in theirs as well. In this way, love becomes not a rescue but a meeting, not a bargain but a union. Psychology offers insight into this phenomenon. Studies show that individuals who carry high levels of self-compassion and self-esteem are more likely to report satisfying, stable relationships. This is not because they are flawless or immune to struggle, but because they create relational environments where mutual respect and growth are possible. They radiate an energy that discourages games, manipulation, and superficiality. Shallow connections cannot survive in the presence of such authenticity, much like weeds cannot thrive in healthy soil. It is not rejection that removes them, but incompatibility. They simply cannot breathe in the atmosphere of wholeness. What makes this transformation so beautiful is its naturalness. It does not require you to push others away or to set rigid walls. You do not need to chase, to convince, or to force. By loving yourself, you naturally begin to filter what enters your life. Mediocre loves slip away, not because you angrily drive them out, but because they no longer find a foothold in your spirit. They cannot survive in your presence, just as shadows cannot survive in the presence of light. And those who remain, those who are drawn to you, are the ones who see your wholeness and wish to stand alongside it. Imagine two people meeting, each carrying within themselves a deep love for who they are. There is no desperation in their exchange, no clinging, no fear of abandonment. Instead, there is curiosity, generosity, and ease. Their love does not come from emptiness seeking to be filled, but from fullness seeking to be shared. Such a connection is not free of struggle, for no human bond is, but it is resilient because it is rooted in authenticity. When conflict arises, they face it together, rather than tearing each other down. When challenges come, they support one another, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. This is the kind of love that wholeness attracts, not a fantasy, but a living reality grounded in reciprocity and respect. Contrast this with the love born of incompleteness. When you do not yet love yourself, you enter relationships hoping the other will make you whole. You place upon them a weight no one can carry, the burden of healing your wounds, of affirming your worth, of filling your emptiness. At first, such relationships may feel intense, even fated, but over time they collapse under the strain of unmet expectations. The other cannot give you what you have refused to give yourself, and so disappointment becomes inevitable. In contrast, when you already carry love within, you free the other from this burden. You do not need them to save you, so you are free to meet them as they are, and in that freedom lies the possibility of true connection. It is no accident that those who discover self-love later in life often speak of finally finding relationships that feel nourishing, balanced, and real. They marvel at how different it feels compared to their earlier experiences. But nothing magical occurred outside of them. The transformation was within. They radiated a new energy, one that left no space for mediocrity, and in return, life mirrored that energy back to them. Perhaps this is the deepest lesson of all, that the love we attract is a reflection of the love we carry for ourselves. To love yourself completely is to create an atmosphere where only depth can breathe. Shallow connections wither, half-hearted gestures dissolve, and those who cannot rise into authenticity drift away. What remains is the beauty of relationships that do not seek to complete you, but to walk beside you, that do not consume your light, but shine with you. In the end, the most powerful act is not to search outwardly for depth, but to cultivate it inwardly, to stand rooted in your own worth, whole and unshaken, and to let that wholeness radiate without apology. For when you do, you will find that the relationships drawn to you will reflect the authenticity you carry. They will not be mediocre, because mediocrity cannot breathe in the presence of wholeness. They will be deep, because depth recognizes itself. And this, perhaps, is the most beautiful gift of all. To love yourself completely is not arrogance. It is not pride. It is the simple act of refusing to abandon yourself in the pursuit of another. And when you live in that posture, mediocre loves can no longer touch you. You will not settle for half-heartedness, because your heart has already tasted the fullness of being cherished by its rightful guardian. So I ask you, will you continue to accept the shadows of love, or will you dare to stand in the full light of it, beginning with yourself?